The xenobiology station on Veyrath 7 had seen stranger things than a frightened litter of Dravath cubs, but not many. The Dravath were apex predators by every biological standard the Interstellar Union recognized. 6 limbs, each ending in retractable carbon fiber claws. Compound eyes that processed movement across 280 degrees. Armored dorsal ridges that could deflect low-caliber pulse fire. They were not, under any classification, prey animals. They were not, under any reasonable expectation, animals that frightened easily. And yet, the 7 cubs in Enclosure 9C had reduced 3 trained xenobiologists to frustrated silence in as many weeks. Senior researcher Joe, a Kelthani with 4 decades of field experience, had attempted first contact protocols 17 times. Each time, the cubs had retreated to the far corner, pressed their armored bodies flat against the wall, and made the low subsonic rumble that their species used exclusively to signal mortal terror. Joe filed a report. The report used words like unprecedented and behaviorally anomalous and, in one unguarded paragraph, inexplicable. Dr. New York, the station's leading mammalian behavioral specialist, fared no better. She was a Prothean, soft-voiced, slow-moving, with a pheromone profile specifically calibrated to register as non-threatening to most carbon-based predatory species. The cubs had taken one look at her silver-furred form and screamed. Not growled. Screamed. A sound that brought half the station running. They are responding to something, New York told the morning briefing, her crest feathers flattened with professional embarrassment. But I cannot determine what the stimulus is. My biometric readings show no elevated aggression, only pure fear. Di, the station commander, tapped her 3-fingered hand on the table. She was Vorith, an amphibious species not known for patience, and currently demonstrating why. The cubs cannot be released into the sanctuary until they are behaviorally stable. They will injure themselves or others. We need solutions. Hi, the youngest researcher on staff, raised a tentative appendage. We have not tried the human. A silence fell over the table. It was the kind of silence that happens when someone says something obvious that everyone else has been carefully avoiding. She is a caretaker, Joe said, not quite managing to keep the dismissal from his voice. Her credentials are in animal husbandry, not xenobiology. Her credentials, Hai said, include successfully integrating 3 other predator species into sanctuary populations, including the Heron pack on Station 12. He paused. The Marin ate 2 researchers before her. Another silence. This one carried more weight. Bring her in, Di said. Mara Ellison arrived at the enclosure door with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a thermos of coffee in her hand. She was, by the station's general estimation, a remarkably unremarkable human. Medium height. Brown hair she kept in a practical braid. A face that defaulted to calm the way other faces defaulted to smiling or frowning. She had been on Veyrath 7 for 3 months running the sanctuary's ungulate preserve, and in that time she had said perhaps 300 words at staff meetings combined. Wah, the enclosure technician, watched her scan the behavioral data on the wall panel outside 9C, where was Dravath himself, a fully adult specimen, which meant he stood 2 full meters at the shoulder, and he had been watching the cubs through the observation glass for days with an expression that Mara had learned to read as worried. They are not eating well, was said. His translator rendered his rumbling voice into flat, affectless standard. 3rd day. Mara nodded. She was reading the cubs' body language through the glass. 7 of them. The largest, a male with a partially developed crest that put him at roughly 8 months old, sat in the center of the group. The others arranged themselves around him in a formation she recognized immediately, protection cluster. Every animal body pointed outward. Every set of eyes scanning. Who's that one? She asked, pointing to the crested male. Designation Calvera, was said. He is the litter's dominant. He was the first to enter fear state when the researchers attempted contact. Makes sense. Mara drank her coffee. He's protecting them. If he goes first, they all go. What tilted his massive head? The researchers attempted to approach the subordinates first, to avoid triggering the dominant's defensive response. I know. She finished her coffee. That's why it didn't work. She set her thermos on the shelf beside the door and crouched down, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the observation corridor. She did not reach for the door controls. Wa watched her. You are not going in? Not yet. She stayed there for 45 minutes. Joe came by at the 20-minute mark, observed her sitting on the floor reading something on a small handheld screen, and went away again without speaking. New York passed at the 30-minute mark, slowed, watched for a while, and also said nothing. At the 45-minute mark, Kale Vera, inside the enclosure, through 2 layers of reinforced transparency, moved 3 steps toward the glass. Mara did not look up from her screen. The cub took 2 more steps. He was close enough now that she could see the individual scales on his snout, the way his compound eyes tracked the slight movements of her hands as she scrolled. She still did not look up. Kale Vera sat down. Wa made a sound that his translator rendered as static, which meant he'd made a sound the translator didn't have a category for. On the 4th day, Mara went inside. She did not bring equipment. No scanners, no collection tools, no documentation devices. She brought the canvas bag, which contained a quantity of the pre-processed protein supplement the cubs had been ignoring, and she brought herself, and she sat down in the middle of the enclosure floor the same way she'd sat in the corridor, cross-legged, unhurried, taking up exactly as much space as she needed and no more. Kale Vera watched her from across the enclosure for 11 minutes. Then he walked over and sniffed her braid. She let him. She did not tense. She did not reach for him. Her heart rate, which Wa was monitoring from outside because he had abruptly become very invested in this process, barely changed. Kale Vera sniffed the canvas bag. Then he sat down approximately 30 centimeters from her left knee. The other cubs came forward in a group, the way prey animals move when they've decided that where the bravest one went is probably safe. There you go, Mara said quietly. Not to them, exactly. Just to the air. I do not understand it, Joe admitted, watching through the glass as Mara distributed protein supplements to 7 Dravith cubs who were, impossibly, eating. Kale Vera had his enormous head resting on her knee. She was upsetly scratching behind his dorsal ridge. She exhibits no unusual pheromone profile. No subspiconic calming signal. Her movement patterns are unremarkable. What is she doing? Not performing, New York said. Joe looked at her. Explain. New York was quiet for a moment, her crest feathers moving thoughtfully. Every researcher who entered that enclosure was performing competence. Performing harmlessness. Performing the correct behaviors for non-threatening contact. She watched Mara laugh at something Kale Vera did. He'd apparently decided the canvas bag was interesting and was attempting to fit his entire head inside it. She is not performing anything. She went in there and simply was. The cubs could not read a threat display because she was not making one. She was not making one because she does not think of them as a threat. That is remarkably dangerous, Joe said. Yes, New York agreed. And they know it. Which means they also know she is not afraid of them. She paused. Dravith cubs, I have since learned, are raised to fear anything that fears them. It is a survival mechanism. Fear response triggers fear response in a feedback loop. But she has no fear response. So there is no loop to trigger. She tilted her head. Humans are strange. All evidence supports that conclusion, Joe said. Inside the enclosure, Kale Vera had successfully gotten his head into the canvas bag and was now stuck. Mara was attempting to free him with both hands while clearly trying not to laugh. The other 6 cubs were watching with what could only be described as deep sibling energy. Di appeared at Joe's shoulder. Status report. The cubs are eating, Joe said. They have accepted the caretaker. Behavioral normalization appears to be underway. He paused. I am writing a paper. About the cubs? About humans. He watched Mara finally extract kale Vera from the bag. The cub shook his crest with great dignity, as if none of that had happened. They are the only species in our database that can enter an apex predator enclosure with no defensive preparation and emerge having made friends. He paused again. I cannot decide if that is impressive or simply baffling. Why not both? Dai said. Joe considered this. Both, he agreed. Definitely both. In enclosure 9C, Kale Vera climbed partially into Mara Ellison's lap, all 80 kilograms of armored, clawed, terrifying apex predator, and went to sleep. She finished her coffee. Everything was fine.